Abdullah had one rule that killed more manifestations than doubt ever did. Silence. Complete silence. For 24 hours after you assume something. Not partial silence. Not selective silence. Total silence. Don't tell anyone. Don't hint at it. Don't share it. Don't celebrate it. Don't even acknowledge it out loud to yourself. Because the moment you speak it, you break it. Not metaphorically. Literally. You shatter the assumption. Disperse the energy. Turn potential into performance. And performance is not manifestation. Performance is display. And display is what people do when they don't truly have something. When they need others to confirm it. When they need validation. But assumption doesn't need validation. Assumption needs silence. And silence is what preserves it, protects it, allows it to harden into fact, undisturbed, unquestioned, unbroken. Here's what you're going to learn tonight. The exact silence rule. Why 24 hours is critical. What happens to assumption when you speak too soon? The neuroscience of why talking disperses manifestation. Real examples of people who broke the rule and lost everything. And how to hold silence even when you're desperate to share. Even when it feels impossible. Even when everyone's asking. Because holding silence is not suppression. It's protection. Protection of the state. Protection of the assumption. Protection of the reality that's forming. And forming requires incubation. And incubation requires darkness. And darkness is silence. And silence is what separates those who manifest from those who almost manifest. And almost is the same as never. And never is what happens when you speak too soon. Now, before I give you the exact rule, you need to understand what was happening in Abdullah's time. And what's still happening now. People would come to him, learn techniques, go home, assume something, and immediately tell everyone. Their friends, their family, their co-workers. And they'd come back weeks later and say, "It didn't work. I did everything right. I assumed it. I felt it. I persisted." But nothing happened. And Abdullah would ask, "Who did you tell?" And they'd say, "Well, I told my wife and my brother and a few friends. I was so excited." And Abdullah would shake his head and say, "Then you didn't assume it. You performed it." And performance is not creation. Performance is dissipation. You took the energy of the assumption and scattered it, gave it away to people who don't believe, who doubt, who question. And their doubt entered your assumption, diluted it, weakened it. And weak assumptions don't manifest. Only strong assumptions manifest. And strength comes from silence, from keeping it contained, from letting it build undisturbed. This is documented in Neville's later teachings, in his 1954 lectures, and in The Power of Awareness, when he talks about not casting pearls before swine. Not because people are swine, but because people who don't understand will trample what you're building. Not intentionally, but through doubt, through skepticism, through well-meaning concern. And concern is poison to assumption, because concern implies something might go wrong. And might go wrong is doubt, and doubt is resistance. And resistance blocks, and blocking means it doesn't manifest. And not manifesting means you broke it by speaking it to the wrong people, at the wrong time, before it was ready. Here's the rule, Abdullah's exact rule, as he gave it to Neville, as Neville later verified it worked, as thousands have proven since. When you assume something, when you enter a state, when you claim a new reality, you say nothing to no one for 24 hours. Minimum, not 23 hours. 24, a full day-night cycle, a complete rotation. And during those 24 hours, you don't speak about it. Don't hint about it. Don't post about it. Don't journal about it. Don't even say it out loud when you're alone. You hold it, internally, silently, like a seed underground, not yet sprouted, not yet visible, just germinating, in the dark, in the silence. And silence is the soil. And soil is what allows seeds to root, to strengthen, to prepare for emergence. And emergence only happens after rooting. And rooting requires time, and time requires silence. And silence is non-negotiable. Here's why this works, and this is neuroscience. When you assume something, when you enter a new state, your brain begins reorganizing, rewiring, creating new neural pathways, new patterns, new defaults. And this process is fragile, vulnerable, easily disrupted. And what disrupts it most is external feedback. When you tell someone what you're assuming, you're inviting their response, their reaction, their energy. And their energy, if it's not aligned with your assumption, acts like interference, like static, and static disrupts signal. And your assumption is a signal, a frequency. And frequency needs clarity, needs purity, needs silence. Because silence is the absence of interference. An absence of interference is what allows the signal to stay strong, to stay clear, to stay intact. And here's what happens when you speak too soon. The moment you say it out loud, your brain shifts from internal processing to external performance, from being it to proving it. And proving requires evidence, requires validation, requires confirmation. But assumption doesn't need confirmation. Assumption is self-contained, self-evident, self-complete. And self-complete doesn't seek external approval. It just is. But the moment you speak it, you've turned it into something that needs approval, needs validation, needs others to agree. And others rarely agree, especially if your assumption contradicts their perception of you, of your life, of what's possible. And their disagreement, even if unspoken, enters your field, weakens your certainty, creates doubt. And doubt is the killer, the silent killer. Because you won't notice it immediately. You'll still think you're assuming, still think you're holding the state. But underneath, you're not. You're defending your assumption against their doubt. And defending is not assuming. Defending is resisting. And resisting blocks. And blocking means it doesn't manifest. Now let me show you what happens hour by hour when you hold silence. Because this is not theoretical. Students who followed this rule reported identical patterns. And patterns this consistent are not coincidence. They're causation. Silence causes preservation. Preservation causes manifestation. Hour 0 to 6. You assume the state. You feel it. You know it. And you say nothing. Not to anyone. Not even to yourself. And during these first 6 hours, the assumption is settling, integrating, becoming part of you. And you feel it happening. Not dramatically, subtly, a quiet knowing, a subtle shift. And that shift is fragile, needs protection, needs silence. And you give it silence. And silence allows it to root. Hour 6 to 12. The assumption is stronger now, more solid, more real. And the temptation to speak appears. Someone asks how you are. And you want to say, I'm great. I just assumed I got the job. But you don't. You hold it. You say, I'm good. And you move on. And moving on without speaking is the test. The test of whether you truly believe it. Because if you truly believe it, you don't need to tell anyone. It's yours. It's done. It's sealed. And sealed things don't need announcement. They just are. Hour 12 to 18. You're halfway through. And the assumption feels natural now. Not forced, not imagined, just part of you, and people around you start responding differently. Not because you told them anything, but because you're different. Your energy shifted. Your frequency changed. And frequency is what people respond to. Not your words, your energy. And your energy is calm, certain, quiet. And quiet certainty is magnetic, draws things toward you, without effort, without announcement, without speaking. Hour 18 to 24, the final stretch. And this is where most people break. Something good happens. A sign, a synchronicity, a small confirmation. And they get excited. Want to share, want to celebrate, want to tell someone. But this is the trap, the final test. Because speaking now would release the energy before it's fully formed, before it's completely hardened. And hardening requires the full 24 hours. Not 23, 24. And 24 means you wait, you hold, you stay silent, even when it feels impossible. Especially when it feels impossible, because impossible is where strength is built. And strength is what manifests. Not excitement, strength. Hour 24, complete. The assumption is sealed, hardened, integrated. And now, if you want to speak about it, you can. But here's what happens. After 24 hours of silence, most people don't want to speak about it anymore. Don't need to, because it's so real to them internally that external validation feels irrelevant, feels unnecessary. And unnecessary is freedom. Freedom from needing others to confirm what you already know. And knowing is what creates. Not announcing, knowing. Now here's what most people do wrong. They think silence means not telling strangers. But telling close friends and family is fine. Wrong. Close friends and family are the most dangerous, not because they wish you harm, but because they know your history, know your struggles, know your failures. And their knowledge of your past creates doubt about your future. And that doubt, even unspoken, transmits through tone, through expression, through energy. And energy is contagious. And contagious doubt is infectious. And infection spreads. And spreading doubt kills assumption. Every time. Second mistake. They break silence by journaling. They think, I'm not telling anyone. I'm just writing it down. But writing is speaking. Speaking to yourself through the page. And speaking to yourself externalizes it. Makes it something you're doing instead of something you are. And doing is effort. Being is state. And state is what creates, not effort. So, no journaling. No writing, no recording. Just silence. Internal. Complete. Total. Third mistake. They post on social media. Vague post. Something amazing is happening. Big things coming. Can't say yet, but... And they think, I didn't say what it is. I kept it vague. But vague is still speaking. Still announcing. Still performing. And performance is what breaks it. Because posting requires an audience. Requires validation. Requires likes. Requires comments. And requiring anything from others is dependency. And dependency is weakness. And weakness doesn't manifest. Only strength manifests. And strength is silence. Here's a real example. Neville wanted to go to Barbados. 1933. Abdullah told him, assume you're there and tell no one. For at least a day, preferably longer. Neville did it. Assumed he was in Barbados, and he told no one. Not his roommate. Not his friends. Not anyone. He just lived as if it were done. Silently. Internally. And within weeks, his brother offered to pay. Out of nowhere. Unprompted. And when Neville told Abdullah, Abdullah said, you see, you held silence. And silence allowed the assumption to harden, to become real, to manifest without interference. If you told your friends, they would have said, how? You don't have money. You can't afford it. Don't get your hopes up. And their words would have entered your assumption, created doubt, and doubt would have delayed it or destroyed it. But you stayed silent, and silence preserved it. And preservation is what allowed manifestation. Another example, modern. A woman assumed she got promoted, felt it, knew it, and immediately told her husband. Her husband, skeptical, said, don't count on it. You know how these things are. They promise things and don't deliver. And she said, no, I feel it. It's done. But his doubt entered her field, created a crack, a tiny crack, and tiny cracks spread. And within days, she started doubting too, started worrying, started checking email obsessively, started wondering if she was wrong. And wondering is doubt, and doubt blocked it, and she didn't get promoted. Not because the assumption didn't work, but because she broke it by speaking it to someone who doubted. And doubt, once let in, is hard to remove. Now here's the real power of the silence rule. And this is what Abdullah understood. Silence is not just protection. Silence is amplification. When you hold something internally, when you don't release it through speech, the energy builds, compounds, intensifies, like pressure in a closed system. And pressure, when contained, creates force. And force is what moves reality. Not hope, not wishing, force. And force comes from containment. And containment is silence. And silence is what makes weak assumptions strong, what makes small assumptions large, what makes uncertain assumptions certain. Because silence removes all interference, all doubt, all contradiction. And what remains is pure assumption, undiluted, uncontaminated, unbroken. And unbroken assumptions manifest, always, without exception. Here's how to hold silence even when it's hard, even when you're desperate to share, even when someone asks directly, because they will ask. People sense when you're different, when you've shifted, when something's changed, and they'll ask. And you'll be tempted to tell them, to share, to celebrate. But you don't. You deflect. Not rudely, skillfully. Someone asks, "You seem different. What's going on?" You say, "Just been feeling good lately." And you leave it at that. You don't elaborate. Don't explain. Don't expand. You give them nothing. Not because you're being secretive, but because you're protecting what's forming. And forming requires darkness. And darkness is privacy. And privacy is silence. If someone pushes, "Come on, you can tell me," you smile. And you say, "When there's something to tell, you'll be the first to know." And you mean it. But not yet. Not now. Not during the 24 hours. Not while it's still hardening. Not while it's still vulnerable. You wait. You hold. You protect. And protection is love. Love for the assumption. Love for the state. Love for the reality that's coming. And love doesn't expose what's fragile. Love protects it until it's strong, until it's ready, until it's done. Now here's what happens after you hold silence for 24 hours. The assumption is sealed. And sealed assumptions don't need speech, don't need validation, don't need confirmation. They just are. And ourness is what creates. And creating happens whether you speak or not, whether you announce or not, whether you celebrate or not. It just happens. Because you held the container. You preserved the energy. You protected the state. And protection is what allows formation. And formation is what becomes manifestation. Not through speaking, through being. And being is silent. Always. Without exception. 5 things to remember. Because these 5 things are what make the silence rule work. Or what make it fail. And failure is what happens when you speak too soon. 1. 24 hours minimum. Not 23. Not close enough. 24. A full cycle. Sunup to sunup. Or sundown to sundown. One complete rotation. And rotation is what seals it. What hardens it. What makes it permanent. 2. Total silence. Not selective silence. Not, "I won't tell strangers, but I'll tell my spouse." Total. No one. No exceptions. Not even yourself through writing. Just silence. Internal, complete, sacred. 3. Deflect questions skillfully. Don't lie. Don't say nothing's happening when something is. But don't reveal. Just deflect. Feeling good. Nothing new. Just been working on myself. Vague. True. Protective. And protection is what preserves. 4. If you break silence, reset. Start the 24 hours over. Don't think, well, I told one person, but I'll stay silent from here. No. Reset. Assume again. And this time, hold silence. Completely. Because broken silence means broken assumption. And broken assumptions don't manifest. They dissipate. 5. After 24 hours, you still don't have to speak. In fact, the longer you hold silence, the stronger the assumption becomes. 24 hours is minimum, but 48 is better. 72 is stronger. Some people hold silence until it manifests. And manifestation without announcement is the purest form, because it means you didn't need validation, didn't need confirmation, didn't need anyone to know. You just were, and were nest created. Silently, perfectly, completely. Abdullah looked at Neville after Barbados and said, "You know why it worked? Because you told no one. You kept it sacred. You held it close. You protected it from doubt, from skepticism, from well-meaning concern. And protection is what allowed it to form, to harden, to manifest." Most people break their assumptions before they're born. They speak too soon, share too early, celebrate too quickly, and speaking kills forming. Every time, because forming requires darkness, and darkness is silence. And you gave it silence, and silence gave you Barbados. Not your imagination, not your technique, your silence. Your willingness to hold what's sacred without needing others to validate it. And that willingness, that discipline, that protection, that's what creates everything. Not speaking, protecting. And protecting is silence. Always. Forever. Without exception. Do this tonight. Assume something. Feel it. Know it. And say nothing. To no one. For 24 hours. Not 23. 24. Hold it like a secret. Like a seed. Like something sacred that's not ready for light yet. And let it grow. In the dark. In the silence. In the protection of your inner world. And after 24 hours, you'll feel it. The shift. The solidity. The certainty. Not because you spoke it into existence, but because you protected it into existence. And protection is silence. And silence is power. And power is what creates reality. Every time. Without exception. That's the silence rule. 24 hours. No speaking. No writing. No hinting. Total silence. And if you speak it, you break it. Not metaphorically. Literally. You shatter what's forming. Scatter what's building. Dissolve what's hardening. And dissolved assumptions don't manifest. They dissipate. And dissipation is what happens to people who can't hold silence. Who need validation. Who seek approval. Who announce too soon. And announcing too soon is why most people almost manifest, but never quite do. Because almost is what happens when you speak. And complete is what happens when you're silent. And complete is what you want. And complete requires silence, starting tonight. For 24 hours, minimum. Will you hold silence?